I welcome you with love. In today's talk, I will be sharing about sacred relations. For me, sacred relationship is both the oldest and newest frontier. How is it the newest frontier? Because the issues of intimacy, the issues of love, the issues of the subtleties of a relationship as a spiritual path are all part of the new level of sacred relationship. So that's important. We're at the new frontier. Another part of it is sacred relationship has been known for thousands of years as a spiritual path because of the interaction, if understood as a spiritual way of being, elevates both players. I want to be clear, and I've been doing this for over 45 years, that this does apply to same-sex relationships. The issues of intimacy are really the same, because we're all human at the base. So keep that in mind. Now, in addition, I will be discussing levels of relationship, levels of intimacy, and actually the subtleties of how we, working in relationship, can specifically help each other evolve. And the end of the story, and life is a story that way, we are taking the wild male and wild female and helping each other reach our fullest spiritual potential. So enjoy this video and understand that there's a series of videos, so stay tuned, connecting to the whole series. And they're all about one spiritual evolution. Blessings to everyone. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Om Matakyasan. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Now, sacred relationships. The oldest and the newest frontier. Think about it. It's a challenge that's been for thousands of years, literally at least 4,000 years or 3,800 years, when we had any kind of record, whatever. Today, it's a huge challenge. What makes it more difficult today? We have a culture that doesn't support relationships, more or less sacred relationships. It doesn't really value marriage, and it doesn't really value intimacy. What do we see in our culture? People are addicted to their cell phones, to their screens. This is true. We're in China. We just got back from the Asia Yoga Conference. And we go to a tea house. Now, tea houses are very special places. They're really for intimacy. They're designed for intimacy. Okay? You're just in this very quiet place. But we go to the tea house and everybody's looking at their cell phone, sitting across from each other with their tea in their teapot. It's like a tea ceremony, right? It's a whole entry. But what do we see? I mean, every tea house we went to, same thing. Everybody's looking at their cell phones. So they joke about it in Japan, but it's really true all over the world, that basically people are so involved with their cell phones that they don't have time to be in relationships. I brought it up just last week when a group from Japan was here. It's true. Okay, so we have a lot of things that mitigate against intimacy. We have a lot of things that don't support relationship. We have a serious sexual confusion going on in the world. And it really sorts itself out. They leave the kids alone. but this educating kids about all these things when they're 5. But because boys and girls kind of look the same when they're 8 years old. Okay, but the truth is that 98% of the boys and 88% of the girls sort out their gender identity according to their biological gender identity by the time they're kind of mid-teens. Just leave people alone. Don't get them confused. But see, when you start confusing people about their biological identity, you also are going to undermine relationships. Okay. And then you bring in polyamory. Everybody know what that is? Okay. Multiple relationships. And multiple relationships are significant block to intimacy. Why? Well, because it's hard enough to be in a relationship with one other person. Now let's multiply it. Well, you had a few men, a few women. It's like, oh, well, what happened here? Okay. So it's not that new. I mean, in the 70s, I was working with a variety of groups, gay groups, lesbian groups, all kinds of heterosexual groups, and it was very difficult. People tried to do anything more than 2, you have multiplied your difficulties. We can go back, Abraham and Sarah, and what was the problem? Well, there was Hagar and Ishmael, and Abraham doesn't know what to do. He's pretty attached to Ishmael. He's pretty attached to Hagar, and Sarah says they have to go. It wasn't going to work out. Ishmael shooting arrows, at Yitzhak. This is not going to work. He's going to kill him. And Abraham's lost, and God says, just do what your wife says. Actually, that's what he says. Just do what she says, because you don't have the right judgment. And they sent him away. Now that has caused other difficulties, but in the end, it was very clear who was to be inherited, because that was an important part of the thing. But also the relationship. Multiple relationships are really difficult. Even in biblical times, we can look back and see that Yaakov and his 4 wives wasn't that easy. Okay, and actually it wasn't until 1000 AD that the rabbi said, no, this multiple relationship is really not a good idea. It took them a while. And there were reasons. What are the reasons? Well, people die in childbirth. This happened, that happened. Survival of the tribe, which made a validation for some level of multiple relationships, because things were pretty wild.
Were there not enough men back then?
There were, but
Men tend to die faster.
yeah.
Well, okay.
See, one of the things you're bringing up is men are programmed to sacrifice themselves. They're the walking, living sacrifice in wars and everything to protect them. The other thing is the tribe issue. You're having children. It's like, but you die in childbirth. The children die. You have to have lots of kids, and you have to have multiple. I'm going to say wives and so forth. That just for the survival of the tribe. But that doesn't do so good for intimacy. So when we look back and say, well, that's what they did in the past. Yeah, but that isn't really what we're talking about. We're really talking about intimacy. Intimacy really requires and I'm going to define it. It's durable. It's over time. In other words, you can have intimate moments. This is not the same thing as intimacy. Okay, it's important. It's durable, love, trust, and over time. Time is a big factor. Has become woven into that story. So without that, you don't have intimacy. You can have, as I say, intimate moments, but it's really not the same thing. So now we're looking at, well, this is why it's a frontier, because there's been so many things disrupting it. And it's never worked when the state tries to take over. China, Russia, they all try to collectivize everything. But in the end, they all come back to the family structure. It works. It's biologically programmed to work. So we kind of have to look at that and the bigger picture. So part of intimacy also is reproduction. Not the only part, but it is, and this is from my point of view, intimacy, relationships actually is a spiritual path. That's a very important thing. So we're living in a society that doesn't really honor it, but we're also doing something else. We're not just talking about reproduction or survival of the tribe. We're not just talking about love and sex and eros. We're not talking about a spiritual path. It's all of those. So we're at this point in history, which is pretty interesting. We're trying to combine all of those. We're not, you know, if you use the word survival of the tribe, which was a primary issue, well, that doesn't really bring love into the story. It doesn't really bring passion into the story. It doesn't really bring spiritual path into the story. So, really, for the first time in history, we are saying it should have it all. Think about that, because I'm trying to give a historical understanding to it, too. So that's even a bigger task. That's why it's a new frontier, rather than as it was historically, because we're doing everything. But it has to include it all. In other words, a physical relationship, an emotional relationship, a mental relationship, spiritual relationship, and along with that, survival of the tribe, survival of the species, really. So think broad, think new frontier, and we start to talk about the bigger issues. What are we really talking about? So it's a challenge. So there's another aspect to it that makes it work. It's called courage. Because sacred relationships are a journey into the unknown. You really don't know what's going to happen. So what am I talking about here? Well, we're talking about a few really important things. First, people come together, they have a physical attraction, a chemistry. It used to be called the 7-year itch. What happens in 7 years? In the relationship, you naturally bring out old family patterns that come up and need to be worked through. That takes courage. You have to be committed to those family patterns coming up in your programs. And we also have past life patterns that are very real, and we have patterns of, say, gender patterns. What do I mean? There's certain group collective energies for women for thousands of years, group collective energies for men for thousands of years. They start to come up too. Okay? So all these things are coming up, and people have to have the courage and commitment to work on them. Because marriage offers an opportunity to heal them. Because it doesn't come up if you're meditating in a cave. It doesn't come up. You don't have to deal with anybody. So marriage in that context, bigger context, right, big context, is clearly a spiritual path. I'm going to talk about some of that now. This is a meditation retreat. And so how does meditation help with this? Well, one way is there is a principle. What's the principle? Start every word with love. So as we meditate, we get a quiet mind, and we're more in a place to touch into that space of love within ourselves, which then determines our sentence, then determines our actions, and then actually tremendously affects the relationship. So if we bring love, and I'm going to say light, into every interaction, it's very, very important. Now, it's a little paradoxical, but I'll try to explain this, is that relationships are not the cause of love. Think about that for a second. The cause of love is non-causal love, non-causal peace, non-causal oneness, which comes from going inside and accessing the what we call anandamaya kosha, which is the bliss body. It's not enlightenment, it's just a bliss body where the love and peace comes from us. Okay, now when we do that, we get very independent of needing somebody. But at the same time, relationships amplify it. They're not just a spiritual path, they do amplify the love because the other person is involved and you're sharing love, so it becomes a bigger energy of love. Does that make sense here? So, all that goes on. But one of the important things as we evolve spiritually is indeed understanding we are the source of love. That spark of the divine within us is the source. That solves a problem because certain aspects of relationship create an illusion of wholeness. Two becoming one. Now, there is wholeness in the moment, but relationships can't make you whole. And that's what kind of shows up in the 7-year age. Maybe it's 3 years now, because we're moving faster through your age. But they don't create wholeness. They get temporary wholeness. But one needs to be evolved enough to be whole within themselves. When you're whole within yourself, your ability to have a really healthy relationship is definitely going to be enhanced because you don't need, but you are amplified by the relationship. You don't need, but it supports your spiritual life because your stuff comes up more actively when the two get together. So we kind of see this. And now I'm going to add another dimension to this, which is as a family therapist, even back in the 70s, not only was I working with a whole lot of groups just for free on my own, but I was exposed to a whole lot of theory about this. I also graduated from the Boston Family Institute, besides being a psychiatrist. So one of the teachings was one by Murray Bowen, which has to do with the word undifferentiated and differentiated. Now, let me explain what it means, because it's key in relationship. So I remember at Columbia Medical School, we went to do a home visit, and there were 3 generations, a grandmother, mother, and daughter actually living in one bed. And they all have the same name. And they were really, obviously, greatly dysfunctional. That is the epitome of undifferentiated. You don't know who you are. You have no real clear boundaries. And it's like an emotional mental block. Okay. Now, relationship, I'm going to just say 3 levels. There's multiple levels, but if there's 3, I'm going to just say 3 basics, just so we get a handle on the story. The first level would be more undifferentiated, where people come together almost as a business deal. Let me see what if I can think that. So, the message the man is giving out is, usually tracks the other. The female essence is, money, power, flashy car. The woman on the end is focusing more on raw sex, and they're attracting on that level. Okay, it isn't like an evolutionary type thing. Okay. Now I'll also say something else. Some of these relationships last a really long time because they're kind of very, very codependent. This is the most codependent relationship. But as I say, it can bring that longevity because of its undifferentiated nature. They don't really see each other. So if you envision two people hugging, and they're looking past each other, not looking at each other. Does that make sense what I just said? Because that's an image. The next level is when people are working very hard to become differentiated, and so they're focusing on their boundaries. Equal, separate bank accounts, separate jobs, everything is equal. Okay? But in a very, I'm going to say, forced way, politically correct way, whatever reasons, now it's political correctness, but it's a struggle to become differentiated. Okay? And so the sexual energies are also that way. What people lose in that by kind of being unisex, so to speak, is they lose the polarity. See, in intimate relationships, there needs to be a polarity. I'll use another term, complementary equalness. Everybody's equal, but they have different functions. That's a key. And that gives the arc, energetic arc of polarity, which then gives a spark and arrows to the relationship. Separate but equal kind of takes away the arrows because there's enough polarity to create a spark of passion. Okay, so, it's a different level of business. People live in different cities, they do this, and their work is primarily career-oriented, and they still want relationship. Now, I'm giving you archetypes, okay, because everything's a variation. You kind of have to understand that. But if we don't get the archetypes, we can't really get what we're talking about. So that's all about a battle of boundaries, and the independence is a prime issue. Because you're moving out of undifferentiated to partially differentiated. Now the third level is where people are differentiated. They have already clear boundaries. That's never an issue then. And what we're looking at is what I call alchemical merging. So you have your boundaries, but you can open and let go of your boundaries at any point to move into oneness. That's the key understanding of that. And that's why it becomes alchemical.
Would you repeat that again?
It becomes alchemical because people already are ego mature enough that they have their own boundaries. They're not fighting for the boundaries. And then in the relationship, whether lovemaking or different, they can open up and become one temporarily. And so that's where the alchemical merging happens. Does that make sense? Was that clear what I'm saying? Level 2, you're fighting over boundaries. Everything has to be separate, separate and equal. Here, we're not separate, equal, but complementary. It's not the same. The male essence and the female essence are honored here. Okay. And so a lot more freedom begins to happen in the quality of the relationship. Because the male essence is in essence to die into the nothing. To be steady and die into nothing. Holding the oneness. Female essence is the rainbow radiance. the beauty and the flow, and it's the rain, but there are many essences to that, or many reflections of that. So the one, and so the one is complemented by the rainbow radiance. And the rainbow radiance is complemented with the steadiness of dying into the. Now, I use those words because in today's world, I'm not that concerned about being politically correct, but in today's world, I'm talking about essences rather than necessarily biological gender identities. Okay, because you can see what I'm talking about in a gay relationship or a lesbian relationship. You can see that. Okay, there'll be kind of one will be more on this pole, one will be more on that pole in that. But you can see all three as well, all three levels. And that's important to understand. Now, as we move in that way, okay, the essences need a certain amount of particular communication. The feminine essence needs to know she's loved. Everything has to communicate that. So I'm using the word meta-communication. It's not like I love you, I love you, I love you. It's the meta-communication where the female essence feels she's loved in every communication. Okay, meta is the subtle communication. The male essence needs to know he's succeeding. He's approved of. Different need. And that's very critical. That's a message the male essence has to hear. Okay? And again, not verbally all the time, much more subtly. Key to understand that. But in every interaction, that has to be communicated. That makes a huge difference in relationship. So, no relationship is really going to work, male-female, without those subliminal communications constantly happening. Okay, now I'm going to go a little bit more. I'm going to talk for a moment about soulmates, twin souls, okay, and dharma mates, because it kind of helps us understand. So, a dharma mate is where two people come together for a mission. The mission could just be raising kids, but a mission. It could be political activism. It could be humanitarian work. It doesn't matter. They're coming together, and the mission is the prime connection. And it's valid as long as the mission lasts. Twin souls are people who really are very similar. I mean, they're really twins energetically. Whether they're male or female essence, it doesn't matter, they're twins. There's a certain connection, they come for a certain sub-soul group, and once recognized, it doesn't really work out to get married, okay? Because then the opposites come out of the twins. That polarity gets kind of mixed up. But there's an attraction because it's like somebody's just like me. This is great, Okay. Now, the third is soulmates. Classically speaking, that soulmates usually are not the same age. They usually come from different areas in the world. Okay, and they're actually different. They're actually complementary. And they're at the same level of spiritual evolution. The undifferentiated business deal, level 1, they don't have to be at the same level of spiritual evolution. They're just supplying certain needs. And they're creating a pseudo wholeness. Okay. But at the level of soulmate, they really need to earn each other through their spiritual evolution. And they may meet each other one period of time, but they're not ready. They may be friends, maybe this, whatever. They have to evolve to a certain place so that there's a certain amount of spiritual development that is inherent. So I want to now move our discussion into soulmates, which is also part of level 3. Okay. Now I also want to make a footnote. At least in the Kabbalistic teaching, you can have more than one soulmate. So that may be a relief. And they come from different places, so there are a few soulmates floating around. Okay? And anyway, that's the teaching, and I think it's very, very wise.
Do you have a Dharma mate, say somebody you had a mission with, you have a child with, and then 25 years later, things shift and change and you might become soulmates?
Okay, excellent question, because it is really possible. Not quite the way you just said it, but I was getting to that. So that it's possible that this additional soul can be brought in, that then is your soulmate, that the person accepts that energy, and it certainly can transform into soulmates.
Well, an additional soul like a child? Wait, what?
No,
I don't get what you're saying.
A soulmate soul energy can come in, or the person can transform into a soulmate. There are two ways that can go. You're together for 25 years, certain things have to happen, certain transformations have to happen, and they transform into it. So and that's what I mean, kind of like as if additional soul energy emerges. Not necessarily a separate entity, but additional soul energy kind of is drawn in.
So what I was asking, maybe this is the same answer, that you're together, you do your mission, and you have your kid, and you don't stay together.
Right.
25 years later, things change, and could you become soulmates?
Yeah, because see, for several reasons here.
Mm-hmm.
One is you may not have been at the same level, range of spirituality, and we really weren't ready to be soulmates. Two, the other person, soul energy develops in a way that they can become a soulmate. So in the Kabbalistic system, which is helpful, there's 5 levels of soul. Okay, so in the upper 3 is your individual soul, and then the Haya, which is the oneness, the Yahida, which is merging in, the Durakarla into God. But the lower 2 souls, called Nefesh, okay, is the lower soul, and the Ruach is the second level, the kind of astral plane soul. Those become transformed. So, in the evolution 25 years. So they actually have now reached a certain place where they can resonate as soulmates versus dharma mates. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm.
So there is a transformation that can happen that can bring that about. So there's a few possibilities. The key though is there's not one soulmate and that's it. Okay, that takes a lot of pressure off people in that sense. As people evolve, okay, they become ready to be soulmates, whereas before they weren't. That's why I use the word dharma mates. Is that making sense now? So it's very intricate and very beautiful in that way. The whole evolutionary process. But soulmates have to be in some range of spiritual development, where there's somewhere and they're complementary, but they're at a certain level.
So it could go the other way too.
It can. And that does happen, unfortunately. That's why I say intimacy is a journey into the unknown. And you have to do your work to maintain and keep growing. So one person can get more involved in their spiritual growth, the other person stays there. It gets to be a problem. Now, here's how it becomes a problem, because I've been doing family therapy for 34 years. So I have a feeling for it, so to speak. And a few things. Okay, a couple just keeps evolving spiritually, they support each other. Good. Okay, well, one person stops and the other person keeps growing spiritually, but they don't oppose that growth. Really not a problem. It's not perfect, but not a problem. Third is the person begins to oppose the spiritual unfoldment of the other. Huge problem. That's where it's legitimate to get divorced. Does that make sense? The variations. So it's usually, you don't necessarily go that way, but that can happen too. Okay? Definitely can happen. We get kind of esoteric in it, so I want to deciding how esoteric I want to go, but people can be invaded psychically and they can affect their consciousness. Then they go against anything spiritual. That can happen. I'm putting that aside. I'm just saying some people, they just don't want it. They hit a point, they don't want to evolve anymore. That's okay unless they oppose your evolvement. Not okay. That's a big problem. So, but if it's just like, well, I'm not as interested, so you go do this, that's fine, you go do that, that's fine. I support you. It's fine. Not a problem. You see the difference there? So it's not inherent that as people are growing into this unknown and relationship, it's not inherent that they have to keep evolving equally. They have to allow the space for the other person to evolve. That's the key thing. So does that answer your question? It's a very good question. That's what I said. There's some mystery here. We got to get the mystery part of it. Okay. Now, another thing that happens, or that can happen as part of the evolution into the unknown, is as we evolve spiritually, we are enough ego integrated that we can create a space, a safe space for the other person to work through their issues. Okay? So, if you're enough integrated, you're not threatened by the other person working through their issues. And you can be the witness for them. Very important, very helpful. You can be the witness to help them as they're unfolding. You can be also the validator. What do I mean? Well, at level 3, we're not putting a cap on your involvement. Level 2 that happens, and level 1 that happens. At level 3, we want to bring out the wild male and wild female in each other. You need to create a space for that to happen. More than that, it's extremely helpful for the other person to validate that. Going out in society, that's really hard in the world we live today. But at least in that sacred relationship, if one is validated as they're becoming into their kind of deeper sense of who they are, yeah, it's nice to have somebody say, yeah, that's cool, that's good, versus opposing it, which is very, very undermining. So it's key that a space is created. The more differentiated you are, remember I used the word undifferentiated, differentiated. The highest level undifferentiated would be schizophrenia and psychosis. You can't tell your boundaries in where everything is. Other end of it, which is what we're talking about, is you are differentiated enough that other person's growth is not a threat to you. You see the subtlety there? It's not a threat. Hey, you're evolving good. This is great. If you're in that first and second level, it is can be a threat. So in the level 2, level 1 is pretty obvious, you're kind of undifferentiated. So if you start changing, it changes that relationship configuration. That's threatening, there's a tendency you want to stop it. Level 2 though, it's like, well, we're separate and equal, what's the problem? Well, the problem is you may want another level of relationship. You may want the alchemical merging. You may want to see relationships as a spiritual path, which is not the same thing as separate and equal and focusing on your boundaries. You see what I'm saying here? It gets a little subtle. Right? It's interesting. It does require some subtleness to create the space for the other person. When you are in that space, and you also know that the non-causal love, non-causal peace, non-causal contentment is coming from you, you are far more independent, and you see it's good. We'll amplify it, that's great. But my life doesn't depend on it. So the relationship becomes more of a choice in the intimacy, rather than don't rock the boat here. Okay. And these things are real things. Everything I'm sharing with you are real things that happen in relationship. Now you can see when we're talking about multiple relationships, how absolutely complicated it is just for two people to be in intimacy, how it's hard. You start amplifying it, you actually move away from intimacy. There's no reasonable way you can be in multiple relationships or polygynous or whatever terms are being used that justify the thing. Unless you're not interested in intimacy. But for intimacy, for spiritual growth in a variety of ways, the couple is key. It's just way too difficult. I have yet to see more than a couple being able to master this.
It sounds, you're letting your partner evolve, go to meditation and do this stuff, and the other person really isn't doing it, but they're supporting him. Like,
Right.
Go without me. Well, eventually, there's going to have to be a shift, I would think.
Not necessarily.
Wouldn't it be hard
Because they have other aspects. See, a full relationship is physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Maybe they're not holding together on that, but they're holding together on the other levels. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It only breaks down when it's opposed. But usually what happens is the other person eventually comes along. Maybe it's 2 years later or 5 years later, they get, well, maybe I should check this out. Maybe I should check out going vegan. Maybe I should check out, do you see what I mean?
Yep.
So eventually the one pulls the other one. If they're not opposed.
Right. And if they got all the other stuff going on together.
Right, the bond is there.
Right.
So that's key. So it's a good point you're bringing up. Because it does bring in involvement from both, as long as you're not. The idea of creating the space for the other is very, very important in this whole thing. It really is critical. It is very hard in our world to be your full, authentic self. Okay. So people say, oh, love's blind. No. Love is the most perceptive, because in love, you actually see the beauty in the other person. You actually see their authenticity. And, more important, you're able to validate it. That's huge. Okay? So, please get love is not blind. Love is like a cosmic microscope where you get to see the essence of that person's soul. And you may be the only one seeing it. See what we're saying? So it's hugely important. And then you can support that evolution. So whenever you say love is blind, it's like, well, no, you don't get it. Love is the most perceptive, because experience and see the true beauty of the other person. That's powerful. Okay? So that's just another kind of insight into the subtlety of all this. And it is clearly subtle in the whole evolutionary process. So at the level 3, people are coming together not for a mission like a humanitarian mission, but to help each other reach their highest spiritual potential. That's kind of very much inherent in the level 3 alchemical merging. So at the level 3, particularly in the sexuality, we are able to have an alchemical merging because you're not spending your time protecting your boundaries. You're able to open up and let that flow happen. So it's another little piece to that, but it is about enhancing spiritual life. On a more subtle plane, as below, so above. So when a couple's having an alchemical merging, which is more overt in the spiritual, sexual relationship, it again heals the heavens. It also activates what I call spiritual eros. So eros is a very important concept. There's a great kind of story, is that the energy of eros, okay, I'll make it back for a second. The Ark of the Covenant has 2 angels, cherubim, making love. I mean, their wings are touching, but they're making love. But they're facing each other, and they're making love. So that's kind of the archetype of spiritual eros. So, but eros is getting out of control, so the rabbis said what to do. They prayed that the eros would be eliminated. Too much, people are just too erotically out of balance. So, after days of prayer, this lion emerges out of the ark. Immediately, or let's say within the next 3 days, people's relationships started falling off. People stopped going to work. All creativity stopped, and they realized, oh, I think we made a mistake. We made a mistake here. So they prayed, please God, just send us back the good eros, which is the creativity and seeing the divine element. God said, no deal. He said, you have to take the whole thing, because part of the whole eros is being able to master all those issues that come up. But we'll modify it so it won't be so intense. So the lion came back into it. And then after that, people began to work, and relationships began to work, and things began to happen. Now, taking it, the meaning of eros, okay, from the way I'm talking about, eros is the passion that makes society work. This is often what we see, a breakdown in the often communist or social countries, that they lose their eros. Everything is mechanically equal. You don't have to do anything. Creativity is not rewarded. And so eros goes down. And that's why you see in China and Russia, they go back the other way. Okay, great experiment, good theory, or interesting theory, didn't work. We can say, well, what about, I don't know about Sweden, what about Denmark? Now, well, they have huge natural resources that allow us to work, but basically we have more of a Venezuela situation. Everybody aware politically, Venezuela's seriously broken down. Didn't work. Okay. You can't eliminate eros from a society and expect it to work. It's a driving force. So I'm taking it a little bit subtly here. So we develop the spiritual eros when the sacred male and sacred female are facing each other like the angels. If they turn away, things break down. Okay, so we're looking at this Eros, spiritual Eros energy. Now when the second temple fell, Eros went into exile. Okay. Ark disappeared. No ark. Okay, so, and now today, Eros became sexuality, which is really not what we're talking about. And now today, it's been exiled again, and so we have the emergence of pornography. Got to see the sequence. We have spiritual Eros, or I'll use the word Eros. Then we have sexuality, gets big emphasized because the temple has fallen. You don't have the source of the spirituality. And today, pornography, Eros has become pornography, which is the soup of the soup, but actually is seriously perverted. And if you look, I don't want to get too much into pornography, but I'll make one or two statements. If you look at some of the statements of some of these people who are serial rapists and so forth, they will talk about their going off the path from being exposed to pornography because it's so perverted. It's important to understand, and I write about it in my book, Conscious Parenting, that pornography is a huge problem, but it also really creates distortions, and men are more affected by it. They're the ones that are doing the serial killing and raping and so forth. Some of these people admitted before they were executed is pornography where it started. So we have to understand these are real forces, and being liberal actually isn't being such a good thing. These are destructive forces, the pornography. That's as far as I want to go with that. But we need to understand we are working with forces in society. Now let's turn it around. So in the level 3, in the alchemical merging, we are reactivating spiritual Eros. Well, what does that mean? Well, it takes us way beyond sexuality. Remember, that's the first exile of Eros. What we are doing is we're creating a spiritual Eros where everything has the glow of the divine. Because Eros, in the level I'm talking about, has to do with experiencing the erotic dance of the divine in all creation. I think erotic is really about the passionate and the love, the beauty in all creation. So we begin to see, with the power of love, we begin to see the beauty in all creation. That's the spiritual Eros. Now that gets activated, more activated in the level 3 relationship, because you're opening up, you are actually becoming the ark. And so you're activating the power of spiritual Eros, which everybody has within them. You're activating that. So everything becomes the erotic beauty of the divine in all creation. That's a very important part of really the whole picture, is that a level 3 relationship, the alchemical merging, is activating your living in erotic divinity, which again is not sexual, it's just appreciating the dance of the divine in all creation. So that's the spiritual level. And we support each other spiritually, that's good, but I'm saying another energetic gets activated, which takes us back to the first temple, when the ark was there, where we're literally activating the power of spiritual vision, and more than vision, experience. So we're having the experience of the Eros of God in all creation. That's a wow. So we see now that sacred relationships is the spiritual path. not only to bring up your family of origin issues, your historical family of origin issues that go back to the lineages, all that comes up in relationship. The idea of yourself becoming complete within yourself, to evolve spiritually, and ultimately to play out the chemical merging that activates the spiritual eros that allows you to completely rejoice in the dance of the divine in all creation. So may you all be blessed with this understanding, or multiple levels of understanding, and apply it well to your lives. Amen. Oh, the Okay.